Well, let's get started. We have a significant number of our anticipated participants. So thank you for joining us today with the Foreign Trade Association. We're 100 years old last year, one of the oldest trade associations in the country and certainly in Southern California. And on behalf of the Foreign Trade Association, I want to welcome you to our event today. And also encourage your continued participation and membership in the FTA. Even though we haven't been able to physically gather, the FTA has had a number of similar events. Usually May is World Trade Week, and we have a big event in lieu of that. This year we're doing something a little more virtual, and certainly welcome you all to our event today. So today we're going to have both Bill Mongaluzzo, Peter Schneider, and Robert Loya are going to be our speakers today. As we join today, please mute your phone and our computer mic to eliminate any background noise, and make sure that your camera is disabled. Please use the chat function for any questions that you might have, so they can be added to the queue of questions. And today I'm honored to have as our esteemed moderator, Bill Mongaluzzo. Bill is the senior editor in the Long Beach for the Journal of Commerce. The JOC is one of the longest continuing publications in the U.S. and was founded in New York in 1827. And it's considered the authority on international transportations and logistics issues. Bill has served with the Journal of Commerce since 1980 and has reported over the years from the JOC offices in New Orleans, New York, and Long Beach. He's a native of Chicago and graduated from the University of Missouri School of Journalism. He has a master's degree in history from the University of New Orleans. Thank you, Bill, for leading today's conversation. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Bill, for your introductions and interrogations of today's guests.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. I am ready to interrogate, but first we want to hear from our speakers. And I also want to thank you and the FTA on behalf of the Journal of Commerce for inviting me to moderate this session. We really look forward to engaging with the transportation community that we cover. Our main mission is to provide content to the industry. And what better way to provide content than to get two really top trucking executives to talk about the 2020 harbor drayage outlook. So I'm going to give the introductions now and then turn it over to the speakers. Our first presenter is Robert Loya, Vice President, CMI West at Cal Cartage Transportation in Long Beach. In addition to his professional affiliation, Robert is involved in a number of local, state, and national organizations that involve trucking. Robert is currently the California Trucking Association, Southern California Intermodal Chair, and a Vice President of the Officers Council. He's President of the Harbor Trucking Association here in Southern California. Robert sits on the American Trucking Association's IMCC Board of Directors and the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach Supply Chain Optimization Group, to which he constantly offers suggestions for improving the local drayage situation. And Robert is a fixture in Washington, D.C. Before various FMC and IANA committees. And then our second presenter is Peter Schneider, Vice President, TGS Transportation. TGS Transportation is a California and Nevada drayage company serving the ports of Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Oakland. In addition to his professional day job, Peter is the Executive Vice President responsible for, he's also Chairman of the California Trucking Association's Northern California Intermodal Conference, and he is on the executive board of the Harbor Trucking Association in Southern California. Peter serves on the board of advisors for the Agricultural Transportation Coalition and is very active in representing drayage companies with the ag exporters around the country. And Peter is also part of the FMC supply chain innovation teams, which are chaired by Commissioner Rebecca Dye. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate it. Mark, thank you very much for those kind words, both of you, and the Foreign Trade Association for having us today. I certainly don't want to make this a one-way conversation because we could speak on this kind of stuff forever, and Bill would love that. But I just want to make sure that I cover the some of the Southern California issues, cover a little bit of the FMC, the D&D, the merge and detention interpretive rule that came out, a little bit of the Shipping Act, what we see as potential things that we can work on. Not very much of the UIA, but I will cover just a little bit who's signatory and what are some options there to pursue, and then just Southern Cal specific issues. So we really want to make this more about what we can do as stakeholders, utilizing the D&D interpretive rule, utilizing the UIA and the DRP process, what avenues we have as a stakeholder group to address some of these concerns that the FMC has pointed out. And really what the HTA and the CTA have done here in Southern California or California in general to address a lot of the concerns that were transpiring in the port complex. So I don't want to belabor a lot of stuff, but I do want to just make sure that give enough information out there. And if folks just ask away, please do send them to Bill, and Bill will interrogate us right after this. So as far as the interpretive rule, I think everyone's kind of given their 2 cents on this subject. And Peter and I were very fortunate enough to be partaking in this group. To say the least, it's been a very eye-opening experience, being able to, to talk to a lot of professionals across the supply chain, see different perspectives that perhaps maybe as a trucker we don't see, and of course, Commissioner Dye doing a wonderful job trying to manage all these different stakeholders in these rooms and ideas and perceptions and perspectives. And it's been really a really eye-opening experience. So very, very grateful for that. But as far as the D&D and interpretive rule, I think it's important to cover the 7 items that the D&D pretty much points out, and what the FMC will be looking at to ensure that there's, incentivizing the movement of cargo. At the end of the day, that's what it's about, is the incentivization of moving cargo. And if it's not happening, there's obviously the merge and detention that comes about of it. So first thing is cargo availability. Obviously, a lot of this stuff probably resonated from the Southern California issues that we've had over the last 15 or so years, with strikes, labor slowdowns, or whatever case they may be here in Southern California, that kind of resonated with millions and millions of dollars that everyone's had to pay in demurrage or detention charges. So it really, started back then, and there's been a lot of folks before us who are actually championing this kind of fair practice, push in Washington D.C. that Peter and I were just lucky enough to be sitting in the seats that we were at the time, that kind of helped at least give everyone a perspective of what's happened from an evolution perspective since this started back in the day, with several associations and coalitions working together to try to basically educate the FMC. And now our task as current leaders in the industry from a trucking perspective is to educate Congress and make sure that they understand what has transpired, what is going on, what the current rules and regulations are, and how they impact a lot of drayage companies, or just in general all stakeholders, because we feel that some of the language needs to be updated. So first thing that they pointed out is cargo availability. When is container available? And we deal with it specifically in Southern California more than anyone else, just because of the appointment system. We've been very big advocates for the appointment system because of turn times. We've always looked for productivity to ensure that our trucks can turn. If we turn, then in general, the drivers make money. In turn, we can offer better services and prices to our customers. But when there's bottlenecks, there's congestion, then cargo is truly not available. Well, we've all wrestled with the fact that the tariff says you once a container is discharged, you have 4 free days to pick it up. Well, is it truly available if there's no appointments? right? Just because it's available in the TOS system doesn't mean that I'm available to go get it. So that's a concern. And so FMC will be looking at that and saying, is it truly available to the trucking community? Is it truly available to the customer? Just because it's discharged the vessel and in an open area, is it available? We used to deal with the fact that we had 8 shifts once a container was discharged to come retrieve that container. Now we're down to maybe 1 to 2, depending on the time of year. Other times of the year when the volumes are lower, then we're probably getting it 3 or 4 times, which is reasonable. But is it become unreasonable and very onerous on the trucking communities and the brokers and everyone else to get that cargo when container shows available but not truly available? So that's cargo availability, and they'll be taking a look at that and see how those practices work and how, if anything changes because of this interpretive rule. The empty container return, that's a huge one, specifically in Southern California, as the appointment system morphed into the empty side. We first implemented on the import side, which was desperately needed, but unfortunately you can't operate 2 different models. You can't have an appointment system on the import side and then a free flowing on the empty side because of the congestion that happens with the truckers returning empties. It bottlenecked the in-gates. It caused the import drivers to miss their appointments. So you needed a full-on 100% appointment system, but there's been side effects of that. And I think we all have felt that when our truckers can't go get into the terminal, or there's no availability of appointments to get those containers into the ports. So that's a significant issue. We deal with all the time. If a container we're being told by whatever steamship line X to go into terminal B or A, and all of a sudden now, because it's changed, we are not able to get a new appointment at the new terminal because that steamship line has maybe reached its inventory levels at that specific terminal that they initially told us that would accept it. So they'll be looking at those kind of practices. Is how far in advance notification are they giving the Drayage community time to make an appointment? Can they get that appointment? Is it today I'm looking for an appointment, I don't get it for 3 or 4 days out? Is it fair and reasonable to charge me for those days that I'm unable to return it when the container is available? So those are the type of practices that we need to make sure that we as an industry continue to highlight when we're unable to return the equipment. We're seeing a lot of that today and this week just because of the number of blank sailings. We're seeing that because of the number of terminals that are shut down. They have closed their gates due to volume. No one's complaining that they're shutting it down because of cost reasons, but there's implications. And all we're asking for is that there's equitable practices, meaning there's not going to charge me if I can't return the box. It doesn't mean that the chassis charges aren't going to be clicking, because they are. And so that's another issue that we have to deal with. But that's part of the problems in the empty container returns. And we have other ports across the country, like New York, New Jersey, where they're forcing you to go across a toll bridge. And is it reimbursable or not? Because you picked it up at a terminal that didn't have a toll where it was located. Now they're telling you to return it to a location where there is a toll. You have to pay the toll. And is that reimbursable to the trucking company? Is that reasonable? Not reasonable? Is it promoting the equity of movement of cargo? So those are concerns of ours. So, and then the next point they bring out is notice of cargo availability. Who is that information? Is it very clear who's getting notified? What party's getting notified? What kind of information is being sent out to those parties? If it's not, if it's like a quagmire and you're trying to figure out where am I getting this information, who knows it, who doesn't know, do I have to log into 5 different screens to get this information? It's got to be very clear. The method and format has to be very clear of how and who is getting that information. Once again, it's promoting the movement of cargo. Government inspections, I know this is a big issue for a lot of folks. And so whether containers held for customs for a tailgate, for intrusive inspection, is it fair to charge demurrage when those situations occur, when containers not truly available at that time? So there's concerns with that. They saw that. I think FMC and the stakeholder did a really good job at those meetings, identifying and sharing with FMC how unreasonable it is to be charged demurrage during those times when you truly can't get the container. So then you've got 3 others. One is demurrage and detention policies. This is, it's got to be clearly defined. I think one of the things that we find today is that if you're not signatory to the UIA, and those are the parties that typically are getting the invoice from the terminal or the steamship line direct, those policies, is it clearly written how you dispute a demurrage charge or a per diem or a detention charge? It has to be laid out. Who are the parties that are going to be receiving that dispute, who the points of contact. It's got to, the SOPs essentially got to be laid out, and it's got to be at a centralized location that's easy, accessible to those parties. So that goes with the demurrage and detention, and if those processes are not listed clearly, then we have a concern, and so does FMC. They see that because it's all over the board. For the exception of the UIA, those parties who are signatory to the UIA, there's clear defined processes there on how to dispute a per diem charge or a detention charge. So those signatory parties understand that process. I think the UIA has done a really good job of attempting to continually educate the stakeholders on that process. Transparent terminology. I keep messing up myself just during this conversation, whether per diem or detention. It's very similar, and Commissioner Dye would like to have a common definition of those terms because everybody uses those terms a little bit loosely, but although they mean the same, I think at times is per diem charged to the trucker, is detention charged to the shipper. So those are the concerns. They want to make sure that language is very transparent and make sure that terminology is used commonly across the country. And then obviously they put in this last this item called Naam Cruising. The industry is continually evolving, and I think we need to make sure that they leave themselves an out because there may be a new situation that arises in the future because of the evolution of our industry that was not thought of during these discussions. So they wanted to make sure that they leave themselves an out that can address future situations that weren't discussed. And I think that was a good call on their part. Certainly wasn't discussed during our time there, but I think putting that in there made really good sense. So that was the FMC. I know I kind of went on a little bit about that, but I do want to talk about the Shipping Act a little bit. It was last updated, I believe, in '89 or '98. I apologize, I can't recall the day, but the last major rewrite was 1984, and there's a lot of things. And if you look at the industry, how it was back then, it was more vertical. The steamship lines pretty much own the terminals and they own the chassis. Now it's the vestification. There's vessel sharing, consolidation. So that language needs to continually evolve. And for the most part, we thought there was some language in there in the Shipping Act that had defined force majeure and what that meant. Come to find out, it's not in there. It's within the contracts of the two parties that are entered into an agreement, but it's not defined in the Shipping Act. The Shipping Act currently, there's nothing in there about pandemics and epidemics. Which needs to be, those are the type of things that happen. IT takeovers. We saw that a few years back with one of the major steamship lines where they were hacked in and they shut down their whole entire network. That stuff needs to be addressed, right? And there's things that continually will change. So the Shipping Act, as we see it, needs to continually evolve to make sure that it's addressing the issues that we are dealing with today in this environment. So that's as much as I'm going to say about that. As far as UIA is concerned, I kind of hit on a little bit. There's options there for those signatory parties. Anybody who is signatory to it has the ability to, if they don't like some section within the UIA, to submit their request to change some language or redact some language, but it doesn't mean it's going to. There's a process there. There's a committee that looks at all that language and even all the disputes, and there's an arbitration process. So there is an adjudication within the UIA, and I think although there's constant concerns about it, I think at the end of the day, it's worked well for the industry. I just think we just need to make sure that as an industry steward of the UIA, we got to make sure that language is always relevant to what's going on today. And I think for the most part, everyone on those committees and at the UIA are doing a really good job with that. Talk about SoCal specific. We talked about the empty returns being a major issue. Appointment modifications. We've had this now in place for some time. On the import side, the empty started about a year ago. The HTA submitted a letter to HTA and the California Truck Association submitted a letter to all the terminals in Southern California. We're basically ready for appointment 2.0. We need to address the empties. The import side are not as bad as the empties, although there's concerns that if there's truly enough opportunities during its import cycle, free time cycle, we still, the bigger burden right now is on the empty side. So we submitted a letter asking them to address that. We gave them about 5 or 6 points of what the industry can do to look at, just suggestions, recommendations of how we could help. I mean, when the truckers are telling you, marine terminals, this is from our perspective, what we can live with, we think is equitable, it's fair. It's going to help both parties on a win-win situation, return the empties, make sure that we're being good actors when it comes to appointment attainment and utilization. I think that's important. We love APIs. I think the industry for many, many moons has been slow to adopt. I think we're clearly in a position where everyone is seeing the benefits of API. That's connectivity between my TMS system, my transportation management system, and the terminal's operating system, the TOS. That connectivity reduces a lot of trouble tickets. It ensures a driver, there's minimal communication at the in-gate box where there may be a language barrier, or there might have been a misunderstanding on a container number or a driver's license information, or whatever the case may be. APIs is grown significantly, and that's derived really from the expectations of our customers. They want information instantaneously. They've always considered the port complex a black hole. You know, they know the ship gets there, and then all of a sudden when the box leaves to go gets delivered, that's all they really, we've heard it clear, loud and clear at the FMC detention and demerge meetings and the innovation teams, that they want more transparency. They want information on real-time basis. So we've asked for more API integrations. I think most terminals are seeing the benefit of it, that have moved forward with that. And so we look forward to continually doing that process. So that's another significant issue that we need to work on. And that one of the last solutions that we've offered, or we talked about as an association, is SB 45. You know, California has this Senate bill that's been on the books for several years, and it addresses, and this is something that we as a trucking community have shared with the FMC and said, look, this is how bad it's gotten in California when it comes to congestion, lack of appointments, our inability to return equipment. Is that the Senate here in California has established a bill, SB 45, Chapter 28.5, that talks about our inability to return equipment. Just what the D&D talks about. But we've had this on the books for several years, over 20 years. Looking at that language, it needs to be revamped, similar to what we talked about earlier, how the industry was vertical. A lot of that language in the bill is vertically written. So it needs to be modified. It needs to be some amendments to meet today's standards. So those are some of the things that we've addressed and we talked about. I do want to share with everyone on the call, on the virtual call, that the FMC does offer opportunities to address D&D issues that maybe perhaps are not a part of the UIA, that they're not signatory to those matters, because there is a process for adjudication there. They do offer what is called a consumer affairs and dispute resolution services. So it talks about certain items like rates and surcharges, demurrage and detention, shipment delays. You can dispute those through that process. It's on the FMC website. It's very clear what you need to do to fill out and dispute any bill. And you have some time on that to actually submit and try to adjudicate some process that you may have felt you as a stakeholder who are being charged, in your opinion, unfairly, to address it. And there's a third-party arbitrator. You're not going to the judge, jury, and executioner. You're going to a third party who's going to look at all the facts. And I think that's important to understand. I don't think very many people knew about that process. They also have what is called a small claims process. And there is a filing fee for that, but once again, very similar to this cards process. It addresses by a third party who's looking at everything from a neutral perspective, and I think it's important to understand there's other avenues other than when you feel that you've been unfairly charged. So I'm going to stop there. I don't want to take up too much more of the time. I know I love to talk, and I'll hand it over to Peter so we can talk a little bit more about some more on the export side in Northern California.
Good morning, everybody. Robert, awesome. You nailed it again, as usual. I'm going to go over, again, some Northern Cal specific things, but also I'm going to focus on kind of the outlook, kind of what you guys want to hear of 2020, what we're kind of looking at from a drayage side, COVID-19 effects on importers and exporters. Robert's pretty much nailed it on the import side and how it's affected. I'm going to kind of go on the export side, talking about blank sailings, a little bit more detail, as well as ERDs, early return dates in our industry. It's really being hindered, especially on the export side. A little bit about congestion in and around Oakland, LA Long Beach, Pacific Northwest, and the East Coast a little bit. kind of do some comparisons. There's some new services hitting Oakland, which are nice. And then Robert's pretty much talked about it, but I'm going to maybe add a little bit on solutions that we're looking at as well, and talk about street turn fees. So blank sailings, the effect of COVID-19 on the whole industry kind of can be surmised by all the blank sailings we've had. They normally have, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 after Chinese New Year for the first quarter for the West Coast, and then, you know, half a dozen or a dozen for the East Coast. This year, because of Chinese New Year and COVID, I think it was 60 or 70 blank sailings the first quarter, and about the same or a little more for the second quarter. Last week was the largest week for LA Long Beach for blank sailings. They had about 7 that hit LA Long Beach. This week was 6. And then the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, I think, is 3. And I think it goes down to 1 by the first week of July. That effect, as Robert had mentioned, takes the terminals from their 9 shifts down to 5, 4, 6. And that is a huge hindrance because our operations are not going to shut down for their shifts. Our operations are still 5 days, 6 days a week, or 7 days a week. And our drivers work 1 or 2 shifts. So we don't stop. Our customers, the shippers and the receivers don't stop. So it's a very large problem to try and return empties on the import side and to return loaded containers on the export side. So as Robert had mentioned, we need solutions to open up detention and demerge. We should not be responsible, anybody in the supply chain, when a normal 9-shift week turns into 4, like 2 or 3 of the terminals last week and this week. We just can't do our job properly. So 4 days of open detention on a container needs to end up being 5, 6, 7 days. Because once the terminal opens back up, appointments get booked out and you can't return an empty for a week a lot of times. The ERD problem, early return date for export loads, has been kind of a nuisance since appointment systems were put in place. And really what's happened now with COVID, exports on the ag side are actually up over last year. Last year, the first quarter, first 4 months, exports were down, I don't know, 20, 25%, maybe more than that, due to the Trump tariffs. And January 15th of this year, the tariffs were reset for mainly the ag community. I forget the number. I want to say $80 billion worth of ag exports China was supposed to buy. And so the ag industry actually has been exporting quite a bit. If you look at some of the numbers for even LA, Long Beach, and Oakland specifically, their numbers are up on exports. They're down significantly on imports, but exports are actually up in a lot of markets. And so why is ERD an issue, early return date? It's an issue because the terminals only allow so many appointments for a trucking company to return a loaded container. And we may have bookings of 5, 10, 20, 30 with several different customers, and we're only allotted so much time to get that back. And you take an empty out, you load it, and you want to return it. There's not enough appointment slots. And the terminal's appointment systems are too clunky, and they don't work well for the export side. So the Harbor Trucking Association, we've got kind of interactive webinars next week and the week after with some of the terminals in Oakland to go over this, because Oakland is such an export heavy market, and hopefully we'll find some solutions. But that has been a major hindrance for all of us. Congestion at all of the terminals around the country has kind of been down, mainly due to volumes being down. However, there has been some spikes at certain terminals and certain markets for various reasons. When you have a blank sailing, a lot of shipments get put on the next vessel that comes in, and it backs things up. For instance, in Oakland at the Tray Pack terminal, they have been severely congested for probably the last 8 weeks, 9 weeks. And a lot of that has to do with export seasonality of shipments. Normally cotton ships really heavy right now. It is not. However, citrus was really heavy, as well as a lot of other exports. And meat, protein from the Midwest, DDG and all that other stuff from the Midwest that comes to the West Coast. As I said, the volumes were up, and the congestion was very severe to where our turn times were well over 2 hours, 3 hours, and 4 hours just to turn a container in. So we're trying to work with the terminals on that, and they seem to be open with it, which is great. So we'll see how that works out. The next thing I wanted to kind of go over was a new service, and this is just kind of a blip, but Oakland is finally getting a first port of call. I believe it's from Southeast Asia and India. They've never had that before. And the good part of that is the service is going to be with 14,000 TEU ships. Oakland gets the same ships as LA and Long Beach, but it obviously does not dump 5, 6, 7, 8,000 containers when they arrive. Oakland still is dumping 1,200 to maybe 1,800 containers per ship. And so they actually work their ships generally in 24 hours and they're out. So for Oakland to get this new service with the larger ships means quite a bit to that marketplace, both for the import side, but also the export side. Solutions that we've talked about, APIs. I don't even know what the acronym means, but it's, a point-to-point basically solution from one software to another software. We are integrating as much as we can with APIs from our transportation management systems into the TOS systems, terminal operating systems for the terminals. We are also doing APIs with other outside vendors, whether it's an ELD or GPS provider, whether it's with any other ancillary type of software that benefits our companies, because that is the way to go. Instead of kind of having your software try and home grow a system that tags on, there's so many things out there, and it's the ease of using an API integration versus EDI is hopefully going to take EDI over. Kind of the other solution that is kind of near and dear to my heart that I try and hone in on the most is collaboration. Robert and I have been fortunate. We were part of the 2016 FMC meetings, first supply chain initiative teams. Last year, we were part of the Fact Finding 28. This year, we're part of the Fact Finding 29, which is more COVID specific with the FMC. But what I want to bring up is the collaboration with the FMC and them basically forcing all of us to get to the table has been immense. And and the advent of the interpretive rule coming out from that just recently and actually being signed has been just absolutely great. From a lower level, not federal, but more regional, the HTA and the CTA have been very good with working with other stakeholders in the supply chain. And there's I'll be candid, the steamship lines have kind of been the thorn in our side. They're at all of the meetings. Large decision makers are not really there. And we kind of are being forced to move around them and get stuff done without them. So the LMC community has reached out to the MTOs, the marine terminal operators, and LMC is licensed motor carrier, that's truckers. We've got meetings set up with the marine terminal operators. All of Southern California, we have a group set up that they're working together to work on the appointment systems and how to work together with APIs and all that stuff and putting everything on the table. And they've been very great. We're always working with the port as well directly, usually in conjunction with the marine terminals. And then, but we're also working kind of on a high 30,000 or 80,000 foot level directly with the ports. Next steps, what are we looking at in the future and how can they help and facilitate? And lastly, we don't do it as much, but we're going to start is working with the IEPs, which is generally the intermodal equipment providers, the chassis providers out there. We don't do a lot with them, but we need to. The pool of pools in LA Long Beach needs to be refined. Just like Pure Pass had its iteration, what, 13, 14 years ago, and then they redid it with the new Pure Pass 2.0 2 years ago. And the same is true for the IEPs with the pool of pools. We need a new iteration of that makes sense for everybody. We hopefully will get something on the table for that. And then one thing I scratched in while Robert was talking that I wanted to speak to a little bit is onerous fees. We seem to be getting feed to death. Back in when I started in the industry back in 25, 30 years ago, we wrote an invoice and it had rate. And then about 20 years ago, with fuel prices climbing so much, we had rate and fuel. And then for the last 15 years, that's climbed into now we have a chassis charge, we have a gate fee, we have a Pure Pass fee, we have a chassis gate fee, congestion waiting time, all this other stuff. And the latest thing for the last year has been street turn fees. And not all steamship lines are charging it, but no steamship line should charge it. It's a $25 to $50 or $75 fee, and it is something that makes something that's very efficient and puts a fee on it. And if you need me to go into more detail on that, I can. Right now, that's pretty much most of my notes, so I'll leave it to Bill and everybody else to ask questions. And again, we appreciate the ability to talk today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both, Robert and Peter. So we'll launch right into the Q&A. And Peter, since you mentioned it, as far as working closer with the intermodal equipment providers, i.e. the chassis providers, that was a big topic of conversation at AgTC last week. So, I mean, you lived through that. It was quite heated. What suggestion do you have to improve the pool of pools in Southern California?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, it's kind of locked with the steamship lines. The steamship lines, I believe in 2005, with Maersk starting DCLI, got out of the chassis business. Well, none of the steamship lines ever really finally got out of the chassis business. It's still in their contracts. But when that happened with DCLI being formed, then Track, got bigger, Flexi got bigger, and those three kind of took over the chassis pools and the chassis fleets within the country for the terminals. The problem is you've got three parties, and not all three parties are equal when it comes to billing a customer. So when a steamship line wraps in a chassis charge into the contract, and I'm paying $30 a day out of the terminals for a pool chassis and charging my customers $35, and they can go the other route and use the steamship line. Oh my gosh, trying to think of the wording, but the steamship line.
They get a discount, or
well, they get a severe discount, but it's just wrapped into their contract.
Contract rate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, the box rule?
Yeah, well, it's the box rule. I'm trying to think of, there's two types of contracts: carrier haulage and merchant haulage.
Oh yeah, carrier haulage.
Carrier haulage. I couldn't think of the word. So with carrier haulage, it's wrapped into the contract, and it's a door move. That was the other word I'm trying to think of. With merchant haulage, we are getting the bill, and it's $30 a day, and we have to bill that out and everything. So there's a big variance there. Robert could probably speak even more intuitively on it. I mean, there's a massive now legal battle through the ATA and the intermodal committee with OSEMA on that. To answer your question on the pool of pools, there needs to be a collaborative effort of the IEPs, the motor carriers, marine terminal operators, and the steamship lines to sit down and formulate what's next best for everybody.
Okay, that's very well put, Peter, and I'm sure we're going to be discussing this issue for months, if not years to come.
Yeah.
Okay, then Robert, in my role as a prosecutor, rabble rouser, whatever, I wanted to talk a little bit about the the difficulty difficulties that you very well described concerning the appointment system. The one response I always get from the terminal operators when I give them the laundry list of complaints from the trucking community is they always say, well, you know, look at how many unfilled slots we have, how many unfilled appointment slots we have, oftentimes on the second shift of the day in LA Long Beach as opposed to the first. But you get the message that they're saying we have plenty of appointment slots. It's just that the truckers are not taking advantage of what's available.
Right. So let me talk about it from an import and then an export, because, or I'm sorry, empty return, because I think there's two different animals going on here and two different business practices or behaviors that we have to deal with. On the import side, you know, it's very conceivable that you schedule an appointment and the reason why you miss it is because A, you're returning an empty back into another terminal. There's possibly an accident en route back. So your first, your return of the empty, which goes to a different terminal because of the significant drop in dual transactions that has transpired because of consolidations and vessel sharing agreements, where we're just being told where to take the empty versus where we should be returning it is basically where we picked it up. But that's what the industry has evolved to. So there's a lot of factors that it's very dynamic that causes bad behaviors or what's perceived as bad behaviors, why import trucking companies are missing appointments. And I think underutilization of that, it has to do with all those factors. Now, I'm very honest, and I do hold, if we are being asked, are there truckers that have bad practices that just secure appointments in the event they get stuck at one terminal, they can easily leave and go to the next terminal? Absolutely. I don't have that information to show what kind of percentages that actually are not being utilized. We hear the same thing, Bill, that you're hearing. There's underutilization of appointments. There's a lack of or even missed appointments. But a lot of those missed appointments, if you're going to obtain an appointment on the import side, you know, given the situation that we're dealing with today, which is basically the minimal number of appointments you're going to get for an import pickup, it's not because you want to miss it. I can tell you that. Most carriers on the import side are definitely trying to utilize their empty or their first or possibly second appointment, because in the event, which we have seen over the last few years, is that the next available appointment is after free time. And so no trucker wants to put that onto themselves or a customer for that matter. So there is some truth that there is potential reasons why there's missed appointments or underutilization of appointments, but there's also truth that the industry is so dynamic with given all the issues with potential terminal redelivery of a container to one terminal, and then you have to go back to another terminal to pick up the import. You know, the chassis, I think you kind of touched on a little bit of, you know, chassis choice is a significant issue. And the steamship lines, to be honest, and they know this, and this has been documented, is they need to truly get out of the chassis business. And so when we have one customer that we're returning an empty that's under my chassis, a leased chassis or owned, and I can't use it for my second pickup, I have to return that chassis back to my yard. And then I got to go back and try to get the import pickup. So there's some missed opportunities there. So I can go on and on about the, you know, there, to be truthfully, I think when you speak one-sided or only, you know, look at it from your point of view, you're not seeing the whole macro. I think, yeah, you can say what they're saying, and I don't disagree what they're saying, because obviously why would they have, there's no reason for them to lie, but I think they're just not sharing the whole perspective of why appointments are missed or underutilized. Now, on the empty side, there is the way it's set up is there's room for improvement. And this is why we generated this proposed language for appointment 2.0 on the empty side. So what happens is some terminals do not require you to put a container number up until the container arrives, which could be up to about a minute before the truck hits the gate. So what ends up happening is a trucking company, those that are savvy, they figured out how to do this. They go secure appointments everywhere, right? Potentially everywhere where they might return empties. In the event, because the way the system is set up, the steamship lines do not provide us an empty return location until about 18 hours before, like, for example, the first shift. And yet, so yesterday by 1600, which is 4 o'clock, they have to tell me where to take the empty back today and tomorrow. But if I wait till 4 o'clock yesterday to try to secure appointments for today, good luck. You're not getting an appointments until Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week, depending on, you know, the vessel volume, the volumes of the terminals and how many appointments and how many shifts are open. So there is so many dynamics things going on. You know, you get these responses back from the steamship line, unfortunately, that says you need to secure an appointment ahead of time. Well, how can I secure an appointment ahead of time, meaning 2 or 3 days before? I don't know when the empty is going to be available, but even if I know today that it's going to be available tomorrow, I'm going to try to get an appointment for tomorrow. Good luck trying to find it. So the system itself has led to these bad practices. And so what we have as HTA and CTA have proposed to the terminals to say, terminals, the time is what's maybe up for debate. We're saying an hour and a half before the empty appointment starts, if the trucking company does not provide the actual container number, the truck information could change, but at least at minimum the container number, then auto cancel that appointment. What will that happen? That'll do is that create more appointments for trucking companies who do have an empty with an actual container number, because that's the only way you're going to be able to secure those appointments. So there's solutions to some of these bad practices that are going on. And I will point something out, Bill, that really the terminals have not figured out yet. You can essentially use a container number that potentially can go to 3 different terminals that's already delivered to secure an appointment at some other terminal. Think about that. There is no validation to verify that empty has already been returned. So I can use that to secure an appointment. Then I can do a switch of the container numbers right a minute before. So there's a lot of game playing, because you know why? We're forced to do that because no one wants to pay demurrage, or I'm sorry, per diem or detention. So the system has opportunities to improve. So to that point, I hope that answered your question.
Wow, yeah, that was an interesting tidbit that you threw in there at the end.
If I could add a little bit too, Bill.
Pardon me?
If I could add a little bit to that.
Sure.
From a federal level, Commissioner Dye wants standardizations to be put across the board. You know, right now, the terminal has a 48-hour notice to change terminal hours, and we're notified sometimes within 24 hours, at 3 or 4 o'clock for tomorrow morning, which is a violation. And we, you know, Robert and I aren't afraid. We hone up to that and nail the terminal for it, put FMC on emails and, you know, get them in trouble. But what Rebecca Dye is looking to do, and we are as well, is put standardization of hours. They know vessels are coming from Asia and Southeast Asia, Europe, Africa, wherever. They know the schedule of when the vessel's ETA is going to be there 2-3 weeks out, 4 weeks out, and a lot of times. So they can encapsulate all of that data and formulate what hours that they're going to be open. So during this pandemic time, they should know, okay, they've got so many blank sailings for the next 5-6 weeks. They need to kind of publish that at least 1, if not 2 weeks out. So and not change it and hold fast. So then now we know and we can plan our week ahead better. So that's something that can be done and is trying to be done kind of nationally, and then will be, you know, honed in upon regionally with each terminal, port terminal complex.
Very good from both of you. And that actually cues us up for the next question, which was submitted via the group chat. How about the port optimizer? Now, I know the Port of Los Angeles has invested a lot of time and money in the port optimizer, and the intention ultimately is to really give visibility to the supply chain from the vessel loading in Asia to the arrival at the Port of LA or Long Beach and the inland movement. Is the port optimizer working? Do you have any suggestions for improving it? So that question is for both of you.
You want to go first or me?
I'll start, Peter. I'll start.
Okay.
I get a little passionate about this particular item.
Wow.
So this is one of the things that Peter and I, when we were back on the first innovation team, and that came out of I believe it was the FAST Act. We discussed this because it was one of the prevalent conversation point that was brought up by all stakeholders. If you think about it, we typically go anywhere from 12 to 15 terminal websites to view something, to view all parts of our business, where do we check for container returns, appointment systems, availability, IEP information we're getting emails. So there's really no consolidated, aggregated location. Is it working? No. Unfortunately, and we want it to work. We absolutely want it to work. There's a lot of reasons why it's not working. Competitive interest between two different IT software solutions. Transparency. There's concerns about the data being used for market or competition, whatever. So, I mean, those are things that are out of our control that we can't or are not dealing with, and Gene is. But we will say that we're in favor of it. We want a single source location to do our business, whether it's even a national platform that is regionalized and customized for each specific port complex. But we feel that it needs to work, and there's going to be transparency. It doesn't matter who the system provider is. There's got to be connectivity on the back end. I think there's competition issues. So, a lot of terminals have spent millions of dollars on their websites and don't want to actually partake. But, as long as it's connecting to a single source location and they don't have to, and if you're a stakeholder and you still want to go to the website, fine. But, as long as that information is flowing to this single source location and it's just connected on the back end, there's still opportunity that we need to get to. So I don't want to take some of Peter's points, because I know he's got plenty.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Peter, do you want to chime in on that one?
Robert hit most everything. It was brought out of the innovation teams from 16, like he said. Gene invested a lot of money and time and energy to get that going because it was the right thing to do. And we have moved on to those APIs we discussed because that has kind of fallen flat. So that, kind of what we honed on before, we're not stopping to innovate and to collaborate to make solutions. That's kind of Robert and I's passion. We're not going to stop until things are righted in every way, shape, or form. And it's a missed opportunity. And because of COVID, I think Gene has gotten some people's ears sparked to listen now and make use of that. And hopefully all the information in ACE, the CBP website, and all the information is in there, and you just have to add every key stakeholder would add a little bit to that. And there's a blockchain technology, everything would be, encrypted. There's no market pressure to steal other people's stuff, although that is a thought. So it's a missed opportunity. Hopefully that gets re-spurred to make the industry better.
Okay, thank you both on that. And we have a question here. Can you review disputable situations and where to send them to? I presume that's for the UIA. Either or both of you want to comment?
Yeah, I can comment on that, Bill. So if it's, let me just make sure that we clarify here. If you're a signatory party and you are getting the bill, the signatory party is probably a motor carrier, who's moving a container, and they're receiving the bill from the ocean carrier. And you're a signatory to the UIA, there is a DRP process that you have to follow. There is a filing fee, but if you prevail in that dispute, that filing fee goes away, and the other party who lost the case would have to be responsible for those charges. It's in the UIA, so you have an opportunity to dispute that route if you're signatory to the UIA. Now, if you're not signatory to it, and you're basically receiving a bill directly from the steamship line, and you're a freight forwarder, or you're a broker, even a customer, BCO who gets them direct because they just choose not to truck or not to get the bill invoice. There's other opportunities. Hopefully you have it negotiated in your contract that there's some sort of dispute process that you can discuss with the steamship line. In the event that you still feel wrong, and you as a freight forwarder, broker, whoever, you have those options that I identified earlier today. You have a small claims complaint that the FMC, it's on their website. I believe it's $106 filing fee. There's a certain dollar amount that it's capped at. I believe it's at $500 or $50,000. And you have up to 3 years from the violation. You have to cite the Shipping Act. So this information's there. There are also this Consumer Affairs and Dispute Resolution Services. Once again, these are not formal proceedings. You don't need a lawyer to help you with this information. It is informal, but you can dispute those charges. So A, if you're signatory to the UIA and you're getting the bill direct, you should dispute it through the DRP process. B, if you're not, and you have these other avenues through the FMC.
And Robert, can I ask you quickly, when I hear truckers talk about the UIA, they always sound like they're the red-haired stepchild, and I'm not casting any aspersions on Weston LeBar, but it sounds like the truckers feel that they are not full members of the UIA. Can you make a quick comment?
Well, I will say that if you've been to any of their seminars, they're very transparent. The composition of the board there is there's 21 members, I believe, and 10 of them are voting members and 10 are not. You have three IEPs, which are basically steamship line equipment providers that vote. Then you have 3 rail providers that vote. You have 3 motor carriers that vote, and then you have 1 chassis provider that vote. So in general, the composition is not in our favor. And I think that's why they feel that it's not really a viable option to dispute when you have disputes. But when you file a dispute under the dispute resolution process, it is given to a party from the affected mode, which is, for example, a motor carrier, and another steamship line. Typically, that's usually the invoices for damages or something of that sort per diem. It is a fair process. It takes some time, because you're asking people who volunteer to be on these committees to review this information, apply the UIA to that scenario, make sure that it either A, is violating the UIA or it's compliant, and then it's issued a ruling. Now, if there's a deadlock situation in that, it goes to a senior panel members, and it's the same kind of process. They review the facts, and they will make a determination. If once again it's disputed, it's deadlocked, then it goes to a third-party arbitrator. So it is a fair process. So I understand where everybody feels. I think some of the language in there people have concerns with. And I can tell you that I know that any signatory member, if they have any problem with any language in the UIA, they have a right to send that into Debbie Sasko in the UIA and ask for any revisions, any redactions, anything, proposed languages that they can. So I get them. I hear them. I hear it all the time, Bill. But it's a process, and I think people need to understand that. I think not understanding the dynamics and how it all works, it was a learning process for me.
Okay. Peter, you want to comment?
Yeah. Robert's on the IIEC committee, so he's also, very knowledgeable and is behind closed doors, meeting with them, trying to update a lot of the stuff that we've been working towards for the last several years. So some of the language is old, just like the Shipping Act, and that's what I wanted to bring up was, the UIA has been written a long time ago, and it's being updated more often than anything else, where the Shipping Act is, 1984 was the big right, and then 1998 was the most recent update. But it's so far away from where it needs to be. So Robert and team with the UIA, they're doing a pretty good job. It just takes a long time to get stuff changed, and he's trying to do, and they're trying to do their best to get it updated.
Okay, this is all very good. I think we could go on forever. We're at closing time, so I'm going to use my moderator's discretion and ask one more question, and then we'll turn it back to Mark. The carriers have not really scheduled any more blank sailings beyond June. So what is the word that you all are getting? Do you expect the conditions in the harbor to return to kind of a semblance of normalcy, as far as if there are very few blank sailings, that the terminals will not cancel their shifts, and that you'll be back to at least a normal environment of 9 shifts per week?
Well, we had earlier today at the CTA had its weekly conference call. We had Dr. Noel Hogasaba, and I probably butchered that. He came on and kind of gave us a whole perspective of Q3 and what he's seeing and what the ports are seeing. So from what his discussions today, was very encouraging. You know, they had, I think, 51 blank sailings in Q2 combined for the ports LA Long Beach. He said as of today, there's only 6 in Q3 so far. And he's seeing less blank sailings, or where they the steamship line said they were going to have blank sailing only to revert back. So he was very adamant about that. You know, it's an encouraging sign. We're hoping that there's a peak, but maybe not a normal peak. It'll just be a little different peak. But all indications are showing that we'll return to some sort of new normal, and there may be a peak, but it's just a slight blip. And more normal than we've seen in the last couple of years. So we're hoping that's very encouraging to hear from Dr. Noel. And then also Gene's very, very adamant about that stuff. So we're very encouraged by that. I know from our personal customers that, you know, back to school stuff is going to start shipping. And we're hearing late June, early July is when we're going to start seeing some additional volume. So once again, encouraging to hear, which most of my retail customers are very, very slow right now, for the exception of my staples, you know, accounts, you know, the home improvement stores and that nature, the people that continue to ship the staples. So those are good, but the retailers where you see the big swings during seasonality, they're telling us that late June and July is when we're going to start seeing some containers come back.
Excellent. So I want to say thank you to Robert and to Peter, and I'm going to hand it back to Mark now.
And thank you, Bill, for leading this discussion, and Peter and Robert, your input's extremely valuable. We have this ongoing conversation with different areas of the supply chain. We look to be meeting with the PMA and the ILWU in the coming weeks, as well as some of the centralized examination stations. So again, thank you, Bill and Peter and Robert, and those of you who joined us again. Look back to our website for updates on future events like this. And with this, I'll say thank you and sign off for the day. Have a good day.
Thank you.